One day, a lady-in-waiting steps into the courtyard and freezes. Right next to the pigsty, Tsarina Anna Ioannovna, openly visible, her face contorted and breathing heavily, is furiously rubbing her crotch against a dirty haystack. Traces of manure and scattered chicken feathers are visible on the clumps of straw. Servants pass by. One accidentally catches her eye, but immediately turns away, as if they've spotted the plague. A draft carries the damp smell of manure, but the Tsarina herself pays no attention to anyone. She's just doing her job. The maid of honor takes a step back, trying to hide, but Anna turns sharply and, breathing heavily, orders them not to come closer and not to say a word to anyone. She speaks of an unbearable itch, of demons gnawing at her from within, and defends herself with such despair that it becomes unsettling. But silence in such circumstances is impossible. By the evening, even before dinner, several people are discussing what they saw, whispering in the shadows of the corridor. The next day, whispers spread throughout the palace. Yesterday, September 13th, 1739, the Tsarina did something terrible near the pigs. Punishment was swift. On September 17th, 1739, the lady-in-waiting was publicly paraded in the courtyard, forced to listen to shameful accusations, and then beaten in full view of everyone so that every servant would understand it's better to keep their mouth shut. But this demonstrative lesson didn't work. Now everyone knew about Anna Ioannovna's actions, including the guards, the cooks, even the errand boys. Dirty jokes circulated in the kitchen. Discussions began about how the queen rubbed herself like a lowly cowherd and debated why she was being punished in this way. The queen herself becomes increasingly unbearable to those around her. She no longer hesitates to express her urges. She rubs herself against furniture, doors, and table corners, right in full view of the servants. Sometimes when the pain becomes particularly acute, she grabs any object she can get her hands on, brushes, wooden buckets, even the servants' hands if they happen to be nearby. In response, the maids rush about the palace, some trying to keep as far away as possible, others whispering in hidden places, as if a curse had settled within the walls. Rumors escalate into poems and cartoons. One depicts Anna astride a haystack with the caption, "The Empress seeks relief among the cattle." Some courtiers begin to seriously believe that the Empress is overcome by demonic forces and her passion a sign of the supreme punishment. It becomes clear the situation is spiraling out of control. A couple of weeks after the initial disgrace, someone notices a strange bulge appearing through Anna's trousers. The courtiers pretend not to notice but discuss among themselves. Is this a curse, or is she becoming a man? Some call for an exorcist, others advise keeping their distance, and still others record everything in secret, chronicles, so that posterity will know how low the dynasty can fall. In the morning, weeping is heard in the chambers. The maids find sticky stains and blood on the sheets, but no one is surprised anymore. It is clear to everyone that only greater shame and endless suffering lie ahead. After the initial scandals, Anna Ioannovna almost completely stopped appearing in her usual places. Already on the third day after her public disgrace, she was rarely seen at the table or at receptions. By October 2nd, a strange order had spread throughout the palace. The furniture in the Tsarina's chambers was to be redone. All the armchairs and chairs were to be fitted with deep cutouts and soft cushions to make her sitting easier. The servants secretly chuckled. Now even the throne looked like a wheelchair. When entering Anna's chambers, the servants covered their faces with their sleeves. The smell of sweat and old urine mixed with medicinal herbs was becoming unbearable. At the beginning of the second week of October 1739, the Tsarina abandoned her usual skirts and underwear. At one of the small receptions, she appeared in a simple linen robe, carelessly wrapped, revealing a bulging area between her legs. Her movements became unnatural. She sank heavily onto the seat, feeling the soft cushions beforehand, then sat with her legs spread wide, breathing heavily, oblivious to the courtiers' gazes filled with horror and disgust. Rumors of this new curiosity swirled behind her back. Someone even made sketches in their personal diaries. October 10th, 1739, Anna Ioannovna came to dinner half naked with an inexplicable swelling. A murmur swept through the hall. From this point on, her behavior becomes even more defiant. In public, she loses all restraint, using any object to relieve the itch, rubbing herself against doors, the corners of massive tables, the steps of stairs. Sometimes, unable to bear the pain, she literally collapses on the armrest of a chair, squeezing the fabric between her legs, crushing the pillow, leaving stains of sweat and cloudy liquid on the furniture. The servants are ordered to take out the spoiled linen every evening and burn it behind the palace to prevent the smell from spreading. Her clothes are now made with a special slit down the center. The royal tailors are forced to invent new styles to somehow conceal the disfiguring bulge. This becomes the subject of dirty jokes among the younger servants and a source of dispute. No one wants to be appointed closest aide in her chambers. In the fall, rumors intensified in the capital. On October 19, 1739, the first caricatures appeared at the city market, depicting the queen riding on a large cushioned throne with a slit between her legs. Rhymes circulated from house to house. The queen has a cushion between her legs, not only at night, but also during the day. Some claimed to have seen her barefoot, with a tumor hanging almost to her knees. Others swear they could regularly hear groans and scraping furniture in her chambers. Anna Ioannovna's interactions with her courtiers changed dramatically. She became irritable and would end an audience at any moment if the pain became unbearable, turning abruptly and leaving. Servants, especially young women, were terrified of any touch and tried to avoid eye contact. Senior boyars began avoiding private receptions, making excuses. Everyone knew that the Tsarina's illness was not only shameful, but also frightening in its uncertainty. No one could explain the origin of her suffering, so most regarded it as a curse. If they looked too closely or accidentally touched her, they could become infected. The doctors are powerless. They try compresses, cold packs, herbal infusions, and even order special cooling bags to reduce the fever and itching. One night on October 24, 1739, during yet another feast, Anna faints right at the table. A huge tumor gets lodged between the wooden bars of her chair, and 4 people have to struggle to free it. This incident becomes a new source of gossip. Now even the guards are whispering about the disgrace and illness, and whispers spread throughout the palace that the Empress is about to break in half. From that moment on, fear reigned in her entourage. Even the most devoted boyars and ladies-in-waiting, previously loyal, now preferred to keep their distance, entrusting their care to lower-ranking servants. She was considered a threat to the court and to the entire family. For the first time in the dynasty's history, the illness of one woman became the main topic within the palace walls. Anna Ioannovna withdrew into herself, spending increasingly more time alone, and stopped meeting with foreign ambassadors. The chronicles recorded, by the end of October 1739, the Tsarina had lost her former strength and respect. Only a shadow remained of her, the embodiment of shame before the eyes of the entire country. With the advent of November 1739, Anna Ioannovna's condition became the subject of not only gossip, but also outright horror for the entire court. The first week of the month was marked by a strict regimen being imposed on her chambers. The doors were opened only when she rang the bell, and the care of the Tsarina was entrusted to the most inexperienced and terrified servants. The doctors, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, made daily entries in their journals. Thus, on November 4, 1739, it was noted, "The tumor has acquired a dense crimson color. The edges are cracked. The discharge is purulent, with a pungent odor." Anna no longer controlled her movements. In the morning, when the palace gathered for a short meeting, she would appear in a dark robe with stains on the fabric and barely noticeable traces of fluid running down her inner thighs. Her gait became unsteady, and she would stand for long periods, leaning both hands on the tabletop, unable to maintain her usual upright posture. Where previously she had tried to maintain a semblance of dignity, she now openly indulged in all manner of bodily manifestations. She would furiously scratch herself through her clothes, or suddenly squat, pressing herself against the edge of a table or chair, as if seeking instant relief. Servants arriving nearby would rush frantically to the door, trying not to breathe or meet her gaze. The alienation became especially noticeable in her interactions with the ladies of the court and noble guests. On November 11th, 1739, a delegation of foreign ambassadors was sent to Anna. It was expected that she would at least meet them for a brief meeting, but instead she conveyed a strange demand through her servants. All fabrics on the furniture were to be replaced with linen and washed with vinegar so as not to aggravate the illness. Upon entering the hall, the ambassadors were greeted by a pungent smell of medicine, and no one could contain their disgust. Many left covering their mouths with handkerchiefs. A.G.E. chronicler notes that on that day, the Tsarina never once looked the guests in the eye or greeted them with a gesture. She simply stood by the window, breathing heavily, hunched over, as if trying to hide from prying eyes. Her relationship with her doctors deteriorated sharply. Previously, she trusted her personal doctor, but now she regarded their visits with hostility. One physician's diary for November the 18th, 1739 recorded, "An attempt at lavage ended in screaming. The discharge was foul-smelling and the linen was destroyed. Ordered to leave the room." The doctors stopped working for her recovery, preferring to prescribe compresses and ointments rather than be subjected to her hysterics. None of the medical staff agreed to remain in the room for more than a few minutes, washing their clothes and hands in vinegar after each visit. The palace's nightlife was particularly terrifying. Around midnight, screams and groans could be heard coming from the queen's chambers. The servants heard her loudly scratching the bed with her nails, clawing at the inflamed tissue, sometimes drawing blood. In the morning, pus stains remained on the sheets, sometimes even whole chunks of flesh fallen from the sores. After one such incident at the end of November, on the 27th, the senior servant wrote in her report, "The stench is unbearable. All the linens are ruined. The walls are saturated with the stench." Anna's psychological state also deteriorated inexorably. She became irritable, distrusted everyone, and would burst into screams at the slightest indiscretion on the part of the staff. Servants were afraid to even peek into her chambers. Often, after visiting her, one of the young girls would request a transfer to the kitchen or quit. Those who remained preferred to avoid the corridors near the royal chambers, avoiding the contaminated area. Anna completely disappeared from public life. She didn't participate in religious rites, didn't listen to the reports of her administrators, and didn't participate in traditional councils of the nobility. All matters were decided without her presence. Even during the worst of her illness, no one dared publicly mention her condition, although rumors were already circulating in the capital that the queen had become a living corpse and was rotting away. The winter of 1739 marked the end of any hope for Anna Ioannovna's return to life. From the first days of December, the doors to her chambers were tightly locked. No one was allowed to enter without special orders. By December 3rd, 1739, the palace guards knew one thing. Even senior courtiers were forbidden from approaching the royal chambers. Doctors did not appear for weeks, and the medical team worked wearing masks soaked in vinegar and only at night. By this time, the purulent discharge from the swollen tissues had reached such proportions that the floor under the bed was covered with thick layers of old rags and straw. Every morning the maids tore up the sticky flooring, throwing it into special vats standing in the courtyard. According to their reports, which still survive, on December 10th, 1739, no fewer than 3 buckets of pus mixed with traces of blood were removed during a single shift. The smell was so unbearable that the cleaning staff often fainted right at the door, and 2 of the young assistants fell ill after their first week of service under these conditions. Anna's groin skin took on a bluish-purple hue, and in some places it began to form hard crusts, surrounded by a dark fluid. Bed sores appeared on her buttocks and inner thighs, quickly developing into ulcers that were impossible to fully treat. The slightest movement sent the queen into a throbbing pain, and every morning, bloody fingernail marks were found on the inflamed skin. Sometimes she would convulsively bend over, trying to relieve the pain for a moment, but this only led to further cracks and tears in the tissue. Eating no longer brought her relief. Meals were brought to her on silver trays, but her aversion to food became so intense that she refused even to drink most of the time. Beginning on December 14th, 1739, rapid weight loss began to be noted. Her face became haggard, her cheekbones became more prominent, her eyes became indifferent, and her skin took on a grayish-yellow tint. Servants and orderlies noted that Anne's movements became uncertain, and her body became unresponsive to touch below the waist. Every evening, a cleaning crew treated the walls and furniture with herbal solutions, but this only briefly masked the stench emanating from the Tsarina's bed. The maid's reports for December 20th, 1739 stated, "The smell reaches the corridors. The servants are terrified. 2 have refused to work. None of the courtiers dared look toward the royal doors. Even the most superstitious courtiers demanded a purification ritual and the sprinkling of holy water through the passageways to exorcise the demon that had taken up residence in the Tsarina's body. By this time, Anna Ioannovna was barely speaking and losing consciousness several times a day. Pain had given way to constant spasms, her body convulsed, and her fingertips and toes turned blue and cold. The blood from her wounds barely coagulated, and a dirty, purulent mass oozed from the cracks. Doctors who dared to examine the open sores described the scene as follows. The tissue destruction is irreversible, the body is emaciated, and the necrosis has spread. The last days of Anna Ioannovna's life were filled with suffering I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. From early January 1740, the Tsarina's body resembled a living source of infection. Her perineum had swollen to an unbearable size. The skin in that area had turned a deep purple-black, and pus and viscous mucus continually flowed onto the sheets, seeping through several layers of linen. By January 3, 1740, the maids wrote, "The perineum is swollen. Blood is coming out in clots. The odor drives even the most patient from the room." Her body temperature remained high, the fever never leaving her for an hour. Anna's face was contorted. Her eyes were sunken, her jaw clenched, her lips dry and cracked. She lay almost motionless, only occasionally twitching spasmodically with another burst of pain as the inflamed tissues tore under their own weight. Bruises appeared all over her lower abdomen and thighs, and blood mixed with a cloudy liquid soaked the feather beds and flowed onto the floor. Her body refused to fight back. By the middle of the first week of January, new ulcers had appeared on her sides and buttocks, and her skin had darkened in places and developed a marbled pattern, a sign of incipient decomposition even during her lifetime. Servants noted that the odor from her chambers had become so intense that it was impossible to stand by the door for more than a few minutes. Food was brought in frequently during these days. The queen ate almost nothing, writhing painfully in a restless slumber. By the night of January 10, 1740, the first attacks of convulsive contractions began in her chambers. Her entire lower body, already deformed and riddled with ulcers, began to twitch involuntarily. The skin burst, pus oozed in thick waves, and blood appeared in dark spots. The convulsions were so intense that at times it seemed as if Anna would break in half. From pain and fatigue, she fell into unconsciousness, barely regaining consciousness, only for another attack. The servants and doctors no longer attempted anything. At night, orderlies carried out soiled linens and scrubbed the floors and walls, but neither aromatic herbs, nor vinegar, nor candles could dispel the stench that permeated everything. Some recorded that liquid was wrung out of the pillows and mattresses every morning, up to 3 buckets a day. Fear reigned in the palace. In the corridors, rumors began to spread that such unheard-of decomposition was a sign of the wrath of higher powers, and some demanded an immediate exorcism. By this point, the skin of her perineum had turned blue-black, become covered in scabs, and split into deep fissures. The pain became unbearable. Anna began experiencing continuous waves of convulsions, accompanied by sudden releases of fluids and blood clots. She periodically thrashed about on the bed, leaving sticky, dark marks on the sheets. Screams and groans echoed throughout the palace, even through closed doors. Rumor had it that the queen was dying in agony, unlike any known illness. In the midst of this suffering, on the night of January 14, 1740, what everyone had feared occurred. A severe hormonal crisis. Waves of uncontrollable contractions shook Anna's body for hours on end. One spasm followed another, with no more than a minute of calm between them. In these moments, her body felt as if it no longer belonged to her. With each new spasm, the last of the pus and blood was squeezed out of her wounds. Her breathing became ragged, and her entire body was covered in a cold sweat. The doctors and monks gathered at the door hesitated to enter. Only one of the closest relatives dared to remain at the head of the bed. The presence of outsiders was prohibited to maintain the appearance of royal dignity. Chronicles note that in the final hours of her life, the queen's face expressed a strange mixture of horror and relief. The convulsions subsided, and her labored breathing gradually gave way to deep, increasingly infrequent sighs. When the final convulsions came on the morning of January 15, 1740, her body no longer resisted. A final thick wave of pus and blood flowed from her perineum. Her body went limp, Her gaze dimmed. Servants entered the room to find Anna Ioannovna surrounded by black-stained rags and liquid-soaked sheets, her face frozen in relief and peace, as if her suffering had finally ended. Word quickly spread throughout the palace. The Tsarina had died in unprecedented disgrace, and her death became the most terrible chapter in the dynasty's history. The funeral was held without ceremony. The coffin was closed immediately after the body was washed. Even experienced monks could barely complete the rite without fainting from the stench and the sight of the destroyed tissue. Doctors ordered all linens, furniture, and even the curtains in her chambers to be burned. The official cause of death was recorded only as acute inflammation leading to severe tissue decomposition. But the memory of the woman whose death became a symbol of the humiliation and pain of an entire era lived on in court diaries and popular gossip for a long time.